Hey, I'm Dan Kendall, the founder of Health Podcast Network, and I'm here to tell you if you enjoy podcasts that answer everyday questions about your health, you're going to love the show Your Doctor Friends, hosted by doctors Jeremy Allen and Julie Bruni. On Your Doctor Friends, they tackle the questions you've always wanted to ask, like, am I using sunscreen wrong? And how much protein do I really need to eat? Plus, they bring in their own network of their doctor friends, expert guests from around the world, so you get answers directly from trusted resources. Why spend hours Googling when you can let Julie and Jeremy be your doctor friends? You can listen and follow Your Doctor Friends on all your favorite podcast apps, and you can find those links at healthpodcastnetwork.com/friends. That's healthpodcastnetwork.com/friends.
I've never done this before and I need help, and raise your hand, because there's a lot of people that you can get for consulting for very little money to help you through different questions or steps if you don't have a support group or a team. And a lot of inventors don't. They didn't go to medical school or go to nursing school to be a business person or an entrepreneur. They just stumble into something usually.
How can nurses leverage their skills, knowledge, and expertise as inventors, consultants, and the developers of marketable medical devices and technologies? Let's talk all about it with innovator, inventor, consultant, and medical industry expert Ron Richard right here on episode 502 of The Nurse Keith Show. Hey there, this is Nurse Keith. This podcast is about you. It's about your personal and professional development, your nursing career, and the healthcare system writ large. And I'm here to share education, ideas, and informative interviews with some of the most inspiring people from the worlds of healthcare, nursing, medicine, entrepreneurship, and beyond. I love having you along for the ride, and I thank you. I thank you so much from the bottom of my podcaster's heart for being part of the growing Nurse Keith Nation. If you want to help other people find the show, you can leave a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or even Spotify. And you can become a patron at patreon.com, patreon.com/Nurse Keith. You can join a bunch of other people who give as little as $2 a month just to show their appreciation for the value that the show delivers and to help me keep the lights on here at the Nurse Keith Show. Head over to nursekeith.com to find the show notes for the episode, and the show notes are also in any app where you happen to find yourself listening on your device or smartphone. As I said, today we're here with Ron Richard. He is an inventor, an innovator, a consultant, and an expert in the medical and medical device industries. And Ron, it's great to have you here. And I want to start out by asking you this question. Who are the people who develop products and are able to just be the people who have the vision that there's some new thing that needs to be in the world that's not there? Who are these people who do these things?
That's a great question, and thanks for having me on your show. It's an honor to be a part of the things you've done and what you've built through this program. But
Thank you.
To get to that question, it was interesting. I was in a hospital 2 weeks ago in San Diego, and I got the pleasure of working with one of the biomedical technicians there, and he'd been in that hospital for 32 years. It's an older gentleman, and he was getting ready to retire. And I was talking to him about inventions and about my book, and he said, "Well, I've got some great ideas about how to improve some respiratory equipment. Can I just, run them by you?" And I said, "Sure." So we spent about 15 minutes talking about some of his innovations and ideas, and he had some little prototypes that he put together with just some parts that he had there in the engineering lab. And I think people like that are the ones that come up with some really relevant ideas and innovations, inventions, because they're the ones there that deal with this stuff every day firsthand. So a lot of these, and I said, "Well, Joe, have you done anything with this yet?" And he goes, "No, I really don't know how to get to the next step. What would I do to get this, innovation on the market?" So I talked to him briefly about that. And that's kind of how things go. And it always forms into a relationship of taking an action. That's what I told Joe. I said, you've got these ideas. They're kind of sitting here on your bench in your little engineering office. Let's get them outside and let's some other people try it. If you let some other therapists here in the hospital try this. And he goes, well, I've showed it to some people, but I'm afraid somebody might steal my idea. So should I patent it? Should I go to an attorney? What's the next steps? And I said, well, first thing I would do a patent search, on the internet. It's pretty easy to do and it doesn't cost much, but that's the first step, Joe. Go on the internet and look up, what you think your idea, and type in a couple key search words and see what comes up. And so he said, thanks so much.
Interesting. So it's often, sometimes we think of inventors as like this person in a white coat who's in some sterile and engineering environment, who's, sitting there thinking, okay, what can I invent now? But what I've learned over the years, it's often like a nurse on the floor who has this idea and they come up with this thing. And then they all of a sudden they realize, oh, this is really something. And they tell a friend about it and they're like, wow, it would be amazing if we had that. Why didn't anyone ever think of that before? So it really is people like boots on the ground who come up with these ideas. But you just said something really telling. You said that this gentleman said that, one, he was afraid someone would steal his idea. And two, he didn't really know how to activate or operationalize this idea he had. So I think when some of us have ideas, we think, oh my gosh, I have to like create a prototype and then I have to test it. And then what if someone steals it? And, who do I test it on? And then where do I find the money to develop it? And then, oh, how is the factory going to make it? And then when we ask all these questions, I guess then we talk ourselves out of even doing anything. So if there's a nurse listening who has an idea, like, what do you do with that idea? Like, you just gave this guy some advice. So what do you do once you've had this brainstorm? How do you make something come to life in the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Keith, you brought up several good points in what you just mentioned. And to me, all those are pretty common. They're a common theme, a thread there. When I talk to clinicians, those are some of the first things they ask about or they talk about. And then the next thing I know, they've just basically become paralyzed and they don't do anything.
Right.
And they just think this is insurmountable. I'll never get past these questions. And so it's kind of like eating an elephant. You do it one bite at a time and you logically work through a process. And that's kind of what my book is about. You take the framework of understanding I've got a concept now. My end goal is to commercialize it. And so those steps that we cut, or those roadblocks that you just brought up, we've got to figure out a way to knock those down. And I always tell people that innovators have to be courageous, patient. They have to be loyal to their idea, but not so loyal to the point of where they think they've got this great idea and everybody's going to buy it without testing it first and seeing, is there really a market for this? Or is this something that I like and it's personally great for me? I've had doctors and nurses come up with ideas that they just thought was, the best slice of bread in the world. And then they actually open up the kimono and let other people start poking at it and analyzing it and testing it. And then people come up with, well, have you ever thought about trying to do it this way? Or, I don't really like this. So you get these objections and then you have to be able to have enough thick skin to deal with those and be open-minded enough to say, I never thought about doing it that way. Maybe that is a little bit better way, and then fine tune and tweak your invention a bit to make it even more applicable to a larger audience.
I see. Yeah, it's interesting. I have a colleague, her name is Suzanne Mayer, and she is a nurse, and she came up with this idea of a specialized set of sheets that you can fit on pretty much any bed, hospital bed, etc. And it actually has like pockets in it where these insertable cushions can be put in to help reposition a patient. And it's, it wicks away moisture. It has all these different properties. And she's been going through the process of marketing this thing called Cloud9 Care. And it's starting to get a little bit of traction. And she's looking at how to find someone who will actually take it on and produce it. But she actually has had successful prototypes out in the world. So I've met quite a few nurses like Suzanne who've created these products because they saw a need for something on the market.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand your history is as a respiratory technician, I believe, and
Therapist, yep.
therapist. And your first product was a communication board for people who were intubated. And I think there's been over 100,000 units manufactured and sold.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, like, where did that idea come from? Like, what spark made you think, oh my gosh, this would be really awesome? How can I create it?
Yeah, it was firsthand experience of working with patients that are intubated. And the first thing I noticed, the anxiety they had due to losing their ability to talk or to speak,
Mm-hmm.
which we take for granted, essentially. So when you lose that ability based on, when you're intubated, you can't talk any longer. How do you get simple things that, you feel like you need as a patient? So my department manager and I talked about this, and he said, well, if you have an idea, I think we could support helping you with doing the research and maybe building some prototypes and testing it here in the hospital. So they were kind enough to give me the time to interview patients after they'd been extubated. And I asked them a series of questions. What are the most common things that if you could talk, you would want? And that's how I built the communication board. And I made it simple with those top things of top of mind. And then I started trying the prototypes out on intubated patients, using it with family members and with the staff, and did some fine tuning and tweaking, and then eventually came up with the final product. One of the manufacturers of respiratory devices was in the ICU and saw it being used and asked who developed that, and they sent them to me. And the hospital was kind enough to allow me to do a licensing agreement with this manufacturer, who then in turn, their sales force started promoting and selling it. And then, 10 years later, I'd sold over 100,000 units and published a white paper about the importance of communication and reducing the stress and anxiety of not only the patient, but the family members who were trying to, just have a basic conversation with somebody using this little tool. So that was my first invention, and I worked in a teaching hospital for 8 or 9 years. And that's where I started getting this whole idea about nurses, doctors, and therapists could evolve, pretty commonly used devices and make little fine tuning tweaks to that and make something that's even better for the patient and improve overall outcomes.
Amazing. And I know you've been involved in the launching, I think, of over 40 different medical products over the years, right?
Yes. Yep, that's correct.
That's amazing. And how does one find out? Like you mentioned, Googling at keywords to see if there's any patents for products that are similar to the one that you have an idea for or prototype for, right? But how do you find out all the other things? Like, how do you navigate FDA regulations? How do you raise capital? How do you file a patent? All of the different pieces that are involved. You said it's like eating an elephant. But I guess my question for you is this. I mean, you can Google how do you develop a product, right? Or read your book, and we'll talk about your book. But do you need to hire someone who helps you with these steps? Is that what a lot of people do? Are there agencies or consultants who you can hire to walk you through it? Like, how do most people approach this multi-step process?
Yeah, if you've got a concept and you've got something you want to invent, I encourage people to, if they have the money, to go to a patent attorney that specializes in medical devices and spend an hour with them and spend the money. Could be $500, $900, but it's well worth it. I'll give you an example. I had a client that came to me in kind of later stage development of a respiratory product that they wanted to get on the market. They'd spent probably $2 million in prototyping and developing it, making tooling and molds and all kinds of things. And those are very expensive. He didn't do a very thorough patent search. So he actually thought, I'm just going to go to market. And I warned him. I said, you may get sued because I think there's something that is comparable to what you're trying to market. They just didn't really believe it. Well, they ended up getting sued, and they had infringed on someone else's patent. They didn't do a good patent search. They brought me back in as a consultant, and I worked out a cross-licensing agreement, because there were certain aspects of this other person's product that were better than what was already on the market. And the company that was already on the market, they liked that, and they thought, well, if we could cross-license and be able to sell his product and ours, and vice versa, under their own brand names, it actually turned out to be a win-win, luckily. But in some cases, it's not that good. You end up getting shut down. You lose all your invested money that you put into this and all your time, and then you have to start over. And a lot of times people just go, I'm not going to do this again. So yeah, I would advise going to a seasoned patent attorney that deals with medical equipment. Have everything drafted out as well as you can on just a piece of paper, even if it's simple drawings or whatever. Or if you've got a prototype, bring it to the patent attorney. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and then you can discuss openly what this does, what you think are the benefits. And then the next step would be for them to go to the USPTO site, which is the patent office. They do their own search with their own customized piece of software that they can tap into that and do a very thorough search of what's already been trademarked, patented, copyrighted, all that kind of stuff, and then give you a report. And then the person can decide from there, I've got a pretty free runway here. I can go ahead and, continue to work on the project. And then you get into the funding part of it. How do I raise money? Because you need money to make an idea grow. It's like planting a seed. Well, if you don't water the seed, you just end up with something in the ground that never, flourishes. So once you get your funding and your money put together, you put together a pretty good project plan, with phases 1, 2, 3, 4, the end phase being you're going to commercialize it if you want to, or you could just basically put it up for sale. Contact, like the friend you talked about, the sheets. You can organically start selling some things on your own. It's more difficult. The sheet thing probably is not so tough, because when you get into FDA approved products, that's where you've got a lot more hurdles and stumbling blocks. You can't just go to market with an idea or a product anymore. If it's used on actual patients, you have to have an FDA clearance. So that costs time and money. And that's where some people decide, I don't want to do that. I'd rather just license this and get royalties off of it from a manufacturer that I know already is in this space.
I see. So there's a lot of pieces of a puzzle to consider when you have an idea for a product. And have you met a lot of clinicians, nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists, physical therapists, who have had these ideas and actually created products and brought them to market? Is it very, very common for clinicians to be the ones to actually develop these?
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, Keith, what I've seen happen is the cost of getting products to market. It's getting a lot more expensive, and it's getting harder. And unfortunately, getting through the FDA is taking longer. It takes a lot of money to register your products with the FDA. And the other element to it is the FDA has changed a lot of their biocompatibility, toxicology standards, and testing for plastics, polymers that are used in the airway breathing type circuits and things like that. That testing alone can take 6 months and cost $200,000 or $300,000.
Wow.
And there's not very many labs in the United States. Like Nelson Labs is one of the most famous, but there's probably 3 labs that actually specialize in doing this type of testing. So you get in the queue with all the other companies, and you're dealing with long timelines and lots of expenses. So built into your business plan, you just have to factor in that it's going to take longer and it's going to cost more than it did 10 years ago to get a product to market.
I see. And in your experience, in what you've been doing all these years, do you find that there are a lot of people who decide that it's just too much, and then their idea just sort of gets put to the wayside because they realize that the hurdles are just too much for them to take on in terms of cost or time, or maybe even the stress of what it takes to make something like this happen?
Yeah, in my experience, that would be applicable to about 8 out of 10 clients that I've worked with.
Wow.
And I'll tell you the biggest thing, Keith, is that people get these ideas and they're good ideas. But you just mentioned one of the most important elements of our lives that's precious to us all. It's time. And we have certain things that we put time into, that we dedicate our time to. And then there's other things that just kind of get pushed into the background. So let's just say you come up with an idea for an invention. It takes a lot of time and energy and motivation and patience and just basically and money. And if you're working full time, think about this. That's added stress of, I want to get this invention, to market and do something with my idea, but I'm working full time. And so the only time I have to do this is in the evenings or on the weekends. And so if you don't have just, you have to have a lot of, like I say, be courageous and be, keep that innovation in mind, but also keep things in a perspective that I've never done this before and I need help, and raise your hand, because there's a lot of people that you can get for consulting for very little money to help you through different questions or steps if you don't have a support group or a team. And a lot of inventors don't. They didn't go to medical school or go to nursing school to be a business person or an entrepreneur. They just stumble into something usually.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, many of us have children, or we have aging parents, or we have disabled spouses. We have other obligations and things that we have to take care of in our world and our lives. So taking on something like this, I've observed, can be really huge. And when it's a medical product, like you said, there's a lot of extra steps if it's going to be used on a patient. So we really have to think carefully about this. And if you're developing a piece of software or something, it's probably a whole different ball game if it's not touching a patient or doesn't have anything to do with direct patient care. So when we come back from the break, I want to talk about your book, and I want to talk about the world also of nurses and other clinicians acting as consultants to medical device companies, because I know that's a thing as well. So rather than developing products, you can actually be involved as a member of a team, as an employee or contractor or consultant on that end of the scale. So when we come back, I want to talk about all that and more. So hang in there with us. We'll be back for the second half of the episode with Ron Richard, inventor, innovator, consultant, and medical industry expert. We'll be right back with the second half of episode 502 of The Nurse Keith Show. And welcome back to the second half of the episode. We're here again with friend of the pod and my new friend and colleague, Ron Richard. And Ron, prior to the break, we were talking about the ins and outs and ups and downs of bringing your product to market. And you've done this many, many times successfully, which is amazing. And we mentioned your product, that your communication board for people who are intubated, that there's been over 100,000 units manufactured and sold, which I think is incredible. And you've been involved in 40 other products being developed. But you've mentioned several times your book. So I want to talk about your book. Tell us the name of it and what it's all about.
The title is Someday is Today. The subtitle is Get Your Ideas Out of Your Coffee Cup and on the Market. And the way that book came about is I was invited to do a lecture on product development, and it was the audience was at Stanford. It was mostly doctors in the audience, about 200 physicians, and there were some nurses and other clinicians there. And it was about an hour-long talk, but essentially what they wanted to know was, I've got an idea, and how do I get from concept to commercialization? So I went through the various steps, which I outline in the book, including FDA patent searches, funding. The other big one, I think, is forming the right team. If you're going to, have a company and you're going to go forward with manufacturing and sales and all that, putting together the right people on your team. And then also in the book, it talks a little bit about, if you don't want to go that far, take that many steps into the process. Look at consulting opportunities. There's plenty of medical companies that want to bring in the expertise and intelligence of people that have hands-on experience in specific areas of medicine, and put them on a panel inside the company where they can work and talk and engage and interact with product management, marketing, sales, and engineering. So there's side gig opportunities out there for people that don't want to take something to market, and they just want to basically work alongside a established manufacturer.
Huh. So the book is called Someday is Today.
Right.
And your website is inventingstartstoday.com.
Right.
And you're also on LinkedIn. And we'll have links to all of that in the show notes, and a link to your book on Amazon so people can click on that and check it out and hopefully buy your book. So it sounds like you understand that world. And like I said, you've helped develop, or you have developed many, many, many products, like over 3 dozen products. Have you also been on consulting panels and worked with organizations or manufacturers on that level? Like when they've been developing things, have you been hired in that particular way?
Yes, in several occasions. In fact, right now I'm doing consulting with 2 clients that are medical manufacturers, and I mainly focus on business development, channel expansion opportunities to take existing technology and put it into another part of the market. So that's where the last few years I've spent a lot of my time.
Oh, interesting. And during the break, you mentioned to me that recently you were at a hospital and you were talking to somebody who wanted to get into some sort of side hustle as a consultant. And can you tell me that story again? Because I want our listeners to hear what you had to share.
Well, so I oftentimes get called by a company to come in and help their sales team do an in-service. And it can be with nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists. In this case, it was at a teaching hospital, and there was a group of nurses that wanted to understand and better utilize heated high flow therapy devices on COVID and COPD patients. And so after I was done with the group, I think there were around 8 or 10 nurses there. One of them came up to me and said, "Well, I really enjoyed your talk. I'd really like to get more involved with maybe helping a manufacturer like this one that you're helping here today. What's the first steps that I could take?" And I said, "Well, just go up to your sales rep that's there in the hospital, introduce yourself, tell them a little bit about your background. And the next thing should be, I would like to contact someone in your company that's in product development or product management. And I have a desire or a goal to be involved with product development. And if you'd be so kind as to help me, with a few names there, I'd like to make an introduction and see if I could, help your company. And I've got some great ideas of my own, but I'd love to have an opportunity to be a consultant for your company. And I have, a lot of admiration for the products you've developed, but I think I could help, maybe fine tune or, evolve these even further." And so I followed up with her a few weeks later, and she did make that introduction with a company and got put on a what I'd call a think tank or a skunk works kind of a panel with that company to help them with some future projects.
Oh, so she actually got an introduction, a warm introduction, and she got a consulting gig.
Yeah.
That's super cool. So those kinds of opportunities are there. And I know there's some of us many people I've met, like my friend Suzanne, who developed Cloud9 Care, like I mentioned, who have ideas for products. We develop them on our own. So we talked about that. We also talked about the notion of, you come up with an idea and then you bring it to a company and you just license the idea, and then you get royalties and you don't go through all the other steps. So there's also that part. You might not earn as much money in the short term, but I bet there's a lot less stress in the longer term, right? And then there's this consulting idea. And there's this other thing I wanted to run by you. Nurses and others, like respiratory therapists like yourself, will often say, "Gosh, this device is okay, like a device maybe you use at the bedside, but I wish they'd talk to a nurse first, because I can see that if they made this little change, if it was somewhat different, this obviously wasn't developed by a clinician because they have no idea what it's like to be at the bedside in the first place. So if a nurse had been involved in this, we could have made this much better. So is that a selling point when you want to have a consulting gig like this? Like, these companies have developers who they don't know what it's like to stand at the bedside and touch a patient. So is that one of the ins when you want to get involved in some process like this?
Yeah, Keith, that's the best entree or the best way to introduce yourself to a manufacturer. You know, what manufacturers look for are people that do work inside of hospitals because they have to do sometimes clinical research with a partner. And if they know there's someone in a hospital that is the head of nursing or, involved with, the department that they want to test the product in, they could set that person up as being part of the team that is driving and leading the clinical research because they could do the hands-on, fill the reports out under an investigational review board and work, directly with their FDA group and things like that. So that's a perfect win-win opportunity. And I was laughing because I've seen so many products like what you said, they were built inside of a manufacturer's environment, and they're all done by engineers who think they're super smart, and they're smart people. But unless you have that hands-on, what I would call, the human touch, the human element, you could develop a product that's functionally fine, it works fine, but it doesn't have the real, what I call user interface kind of mapped out or as streamlined as it could be.
Mm-hmm. So there's all these different entrees into the space. And then there's also this idea of like watching what technologies are emerging in the world around you and then seeing like, oh, is there a way maybe my expertise could be utilized in this particular space, which makes me think of virtual reality and mixed reality, things like that, which I think are still a thing. I think there's still stuff happening, even though you don't hear about it in the news, because it seems like AI has sort of supplanted everything in the news. Like that's all you hear about is AI every day. So how is AI influencing or being utilized in that space? And how can clinicians, like boots on the ground, clinicians like nurses and respiratory therapists, lean into that and maybe find their way into that particular space? Are there openings for us in that world?
There are, and I'm kind of like you get overloaded with that buzz term AI, and it just seems like they're throwing AI up against the wall and hope they'll find a home for it or a place for it to stick.
Right.
About 10 years ago, I got involved with IBM, and I was working with the team that developed Watson, the supercomputer that played chess against someone and beat them.
Right.
But the Watson project evolved into more on the medical side of things. And what I saw its utilization and capabilities was extrapolating a number of different data points about a patient or patient population and cross-referencing a lot of different information to where you can improve outcomes and do it in a proactive, predictive way to avoid prolonging, care models that aren't working and trying things early on that you know are going to be successful. So an example I'll give you, I'm working on a project now using AI, and it's through a teaching institution in the Midwest. And they've collected about 1 million different data points off of people that have sleep apnea. And they can early on predict who's going to succeed and who's going to fail on CPAP and why. And so they've developed a really cool approach that gives patients an access to a secure portal that has a library of different short videos in there. So what the patient can do is say, what machine are you using? And that says, well, I'm using a ResMed A10. Okay, and then it has a drop-down menu. What problems are you having? Are you feel like you're claustrophobic? Are you breathing too much air? You don't know how to operate the machine. So they just click on one of those prompts, another drop-down comes in there, and it answers a series of questions, and it leads them to the library. And then there's a quick 1-minute video about what they're specifically having a problem with. If that doesn't solve the problem, they can say, I'd like to talk to someone via text or a phone call, and then it ratchets things up to the point where at the end of all this, what you're trying to do is get the patient help as soon as possible with a specific problem to enable them to be compliant with their therapy. And it's hard to be on CPAP. I mean, you put this mask on your face and it's got air blowing up your nose. And if you're not used to that kind of thing, it turns people off. And it's well known that compliance is a big deal. So what they've used AI for is the predictive kind of analysis of the most common problems that people run into. And I think the clever part of it was these little short videos that are really encompassing everything that you can imagine about all the different devices and masks and machines and everything on the market in this little video library.
That's amazing. And I use a CPAP myself, so I feel the pain of people.
Okay,
who
well,
fail
you
CPAP.
you know firsthand.
It's one of the great curses in life. So yeah, that is fascinating. So, what I wonder is how can those of us out in the clinical space kind of get in on the whole AI revolution around what's happening in healthcare? And I think some schools are actually addressing issues like this. Like Ohio State University, the School of Nursing has something called an innovation studio. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
And they actually have a place where people can work with cross-pollination. You can have an engineering student working with a nursing student or a medical student, and they can maybe be developing a prototype, and they actually have 3D printers. And, they have this whole process they can go through in the innovation studio to create a prototype out of a 3D printer and then test it and, find people to collaborate with interprofessionally to develop a product. So, I think Ohio State is an anomaly. I think there's a few schools who have innovation studios. Do you see in the future that there's a lot of room for schools of nursing and schools of medicine and schools of physical therapy or respiratory therapy to have these types of this educational opportunities, so that, because I just feel like the world is our oyster, but we need opportunities to learn. So do you think schools should get more involved in these types of processes and offer this to students?
I think that, and this is based on an experience I had at a hospital that I told you about a couple of weeks ago with the biomedical guy, Joe. One of the respiratory therapists came in and was talking to the biomed guy about something he needed. And we started talking. I said, "Do you guys use AI here for anything?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, our hospital, our administrator is big time into it. He's forming a whole department to fund doing AI research here in collaboration with the University of San Diego. And that we're going to use their programmers and we're our clinicians, and we're going to cross-pollinate and see, if we can come up with something." But I know Mayo Clinic is doing the same thing. I know Stanford is. A lot of the leading Harvard, MIT. So if you have an interest in that and someone in the hospital is really gung-ho about AI and integrating that into healthcare, volunteer to be on the panel, volunteer to help, and tell them what you can do. If you're a nurse, you obviously have hands-on experience out on the floor and what kind of patients. I mean, the big chronic disease populations will most benefit, I think, from predictive, proactive utilization of artificial intelligence.
I see. And what I've seen over the years too is people can get master's degrees in nursing informatics and they can do their PhD in nursing informatics. But what I've seen, from the ground up is a lot of people get involved in informatics by volunteering, like you just said. Maybe they have a facility with computers and software. They're comfortable in that particular space, and maybe they're an Epic super user or something in their hospital, right? So that's sort of a way you can build a name for yourself and a reputation, like become a super user, and then you volunteer on a panel, like you said, and you start to meet people and talk to people and get opportunities, and doors continue to open. But you have to kind of put yourself forward into these spaces and get exposed to what's happening and get exposed to people. So it sounds like you've had the same experience, right? That connections, curiosity, just exploring opportunity and being willing to talk and ask are some of the keys to getting involved in these things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the first step, Keith, is I tell people, don't be afraid to say, I don't really know everything, but I have a desire to learn, and I'm curious about this. And just raise your hand. And there's so many people out there willing to help you, to get on that journey, get on the right path, or help you figure out a way to realize your dreams.
Right. And if people want to get in touch with you, I know they can go to inventingstartstoday.com, and we'll have a link there. We'll also have a link to your LinkedIn profile so people can contact you on LinkedIn. So if I'm a nurse who has an idea, can I come to you and can you consult with me on this beginning, the first steps of this process?
Yeah, I offer 15-minute free upfront consultation. And I will, I think, fairly quickly understand what your idea is and in what direction you should take this, whether it be licensing or is it an FDA product or not, how to commercialize it. And then from there, if the client wants to engage me, I can, set up an hourly fee or a project fee based on how many phases or what steps they want me to be involved with.
That's great. Okay. So people can get in touch with you at Inventing Starts Today or through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I have a few questions I ask all my guests when we're winding down an interview, but before we go there, I needed to ask you a question. I understand that in your spare time, because we were talking about how we have other things we do in our lives other than our work. I understand you write music and you perform live around the country, and that you've had over 500 performances in the last decade or so.
Right. Yeah.
So I had to ask you because I read your bio several times and that popped out at me. So I was curious, just tell me about your music career, because I think that's really awesome. And I just wanted to understand what it is you do.
Yeah. Well, I do write, and I've got 3 projects on Apple and Spotify and different music networks. And I've been really fortunate to be able to play with people like from the Grateful Dead and with, fairly well-known bands. I play saxophone, flute, harmonica, percussion, and do vocals.
Huh.
But most recently I've been playing with a blues band here in Southern California and kind of winding actually down my music career. I used to do sometimes as many as 10 shows a month. And it was a lot of fun. But as I've gotten older and I've got other things kind of to do with my time, I've kind of just cut back to doing 2 to 3 shows a month. I have a show this week actually downtown in San Diego at a famous old blues club. And I still like to play music. But the interesting thing to me is over the years, in the medical industry, I've met a lot of people that are musicians. And I guess my most famous or notorious connection was with the guy who, Dr. Bill Dement at Stanford, who discovered REM sleep. And he's a stand-up bass player, and he played with Quincy Jones and with Stan Getz in a bunch of jazz bands. And him and I actually formed a great friendship, and I got to play live with him in Seattle and a lot of different cities with a blues band. And so but that went on to meeting a lot of different doctors, nurses, clinicians who also had this right brain, left brain kind of approach to life. And lo and behold, it's like music was this common language and bond between us. And I've made a lot of friends over the years through music.
How interesting. Wow. I'm really glad I asked you about that. And I like how you characterize that as that right brain, left brain balance. And I would think that, those people who have right-brained pursuits as well are creative thinkers, innovative thinkers, and be interesting to write a book or do some stories about, what is it about those people, who mix medicine with music or
Mhm.
art. I think it's really fascinating. So thanks. I just wanted to
Yeah,
ask you about that. I
appreciate
think
it.
that's a fascinating part of your life. So
Thank you.
yeah, so I have four quick questions, a little lightning round as we wind down. And are you game for that?
You bet.
Yeah, okay. So first question is, of everything there is to understand in the world, what's something about life or human nature or anything that you really would like to understand? What kind of captures your imagination and curiosity?
Ooh, well, um, I'm still curious about a lot of things related to former projects I worked on and thinking, could I take some of those and actually make them better? Could I involve them to improving outcomes? And I've been revisiting the thought of going back to some of the manufacturers I worked with and doing consulting with them on those projects just to see if there's an interest. But yeah, I remain to be highly curious and innovative with the medical industry. It's given me so much, and I just feel like I have a lot of stuff to get back.
I have no doubt. Thank you. Okay. So, second question: who's one of your heroes out there in the world? It could be someone living or dead, could be a really famous person, or it could be someone just from your personal life who you really admire and respect. Just who's one of those people who just pops into your head?
Uh, It'd be Peter Farrell. He was the CEO of ResMed for many years and developed a great respect for him uh, as an innovator and as a leader and a person who was passionate about medicine and always looking at ways to do things better and improve the quality of people's lives with the sleep equipment that he worked on. But
Hmm.
yeah, he would probably be one of the top people that
Wow.
I've been involved with over the years.
Wow. And I use one of his products every night.
There you
So
go. Yeah,
there you go, right?
ResMed.
ResMed. Yeah.
Free plug for them.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Is there a book or a film, something that either changed your life, caused you to have an epiphanal moment, or just is one of those things that you go back to that just is one of those impactful pieces of the culture that just has a lot of meaning for you?
Probably was back. I'd say back in the when I was going to college. I enrolled in an entrepreneurial course that was taught by the guy who part of it was taught by him, the guy that started Pizza Hut. And one of the books that he recommended, it was by Phil Kotler, and it was the 4 Ps of marketing. And I read that book probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and it had so much in it. It was such a rich read, and it was so simple. But those elements that that guy put together are still relevant today about how to launch a successful product and
Hmm.
just using those 4 Ps. So you can pick that book up and find Phil Kotler. That's a good book to read. And another one I liked was Good to Great, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just talking about taking a good product and making it better or great, excelling. So
Yeah.
that's another one that's kind of stuck with me all over the years.
Oh, those are good ones. Thank you. Okay. Last question. If you were named emperor of the world tomorrow and you had the opportunity to improve the lives of everybody in the world, what would be the first thing you would want to do? And you would have the power to make it happen. What would you want to do?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because I've been wondering when are we going to get rid of daylight savings time?
Oh, wow.
And I would
Interesting.
totally get rid of it because I've all the research I've done, it does nothing but harm and no good at all to people's sleep hygiene, to setting the clock back and forth and back and forth. It's just like total nonsense. So if I was the emperor with the magic wand, daylight savings time's gone.
Please, please. I think about that every 6 months.
Yeah.
So that would be awesome. So you got my vote. All right.
Thank you.
Well, Ron, thank you so much. People can find your book and they can look you up on inventingstartstoday.com. They can find you on LinkedIn. All the links will be in the show notes. And thanks for being out there and helping develop products and make people's lives better and making great music too. And thank you for being on the show. It's really been great. This has been really instructive and satisfied a lot of my questions and curiosities. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Keith.
Well, there you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nurse Keith Show. Remember to go to inventingstartstoday.com to meet Ron or find him on LinkedIn. Look at the show notes and you'll find the links right there. If you need personalized holistic career coaching, make sure you check out Nurse Keith Coaching at nursekeith.com. Mention the show and get 10% off your first coaching package. We are proud members of the Health Podcast Network at healthpodcastnetwork.com, and we are produced by the amazing Rob Johnston of 520R Podcasting. And before we say goodbye, I'll leave you with this quote by Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Be well, dig deep, seek joy, keep in touch. This is Nurse Keith saying adios till next time from beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico. And my new friend Ron Richard saying arrivederci from
Temecula, California.
All right. Thank you, Ron, so much. Thanks to everybody for listening. And we will, of course, catch you on the proverbial flip side.